So let's talk about tire stagger, wheel offset, and air pressure. Right here, right now. Let's get busy. So I mount up all of the tires and I air them up to the exact same air pressure on each one of them. Now for these asphalt pull-offs right here, I took them all to 12 pounds is what I went to. Reason I went to 12 pounds, the range on these tires when I run them ranges from about 8 up to about 16 is where my range is. I set them all to 12 just as an average. Now why am I doing that? Well, I'm doing that because dirt tires like Hoosiers and American Racers, different brands that are specifically for dirt, they're going to be bias tires that have nylon cords across them, not steel belts like a radial tire does. And so when the air pressure increases or decreases, the tire does grow or contract in size a small amount. And so you set them all to the same air pressure. You need to give it a couple of hours. I recommend setting the air pressure one evening and then waiting to the next to measure all of your sizes of your tires using a tape measure around the tire or a stagger stick. Just make sure whatever method you use the same method on all the tires the same way. But overnight and then measure it, or at least a couple of hours, because if a tire was at 8 or a tire was at 16 or something and then you go to 12, you're going to get most of that difference in size immediately, but not all of it. And so you give it a little bit of time and then it'll settle down. All right, so I've got all 5 down through here, smallest to largest. I've went through the sizes. They run from 81.5 all the way up to 83 inches. These are all 30-35. These are all the exact same from the factory stamped size. They're all sitting at the same air pressure, and I have kept them at that same air pressure for a couple of days. So I have got 1.5 inches of rollout difference between these tires just in this range of 5. If I was to mount up 10 or 15 or 20, it might be that I find that I've got some that are a little more extreme than that. Maybe I've got up to 2 or 3 inches in total. But 1.5 inches is a pretty good average. I typically will see that. So like with these 30-35s, it's real common for me to see, everything from 81 to 83 inches very commonly. That holds true for a lot of tires that within an exact size at an exact air pressure on these bias racing tires, you're going to see about 2 inches as your total range. Now you won't always get lucky enough to have that, like you buy 2 new tires and you need to put the tires on the rear of your car and you've only got 1 inch between them and you really want 2. So I'm not saying you're always going to see it, but when you mount up a lot of them, you'll typically see that. Okay, let's get to the board. All right, so I've got the 5 tire sizes wrote down right here, and then this is the car, this is the rear axle, that's the hubs. This is the front of the car, and that's the hubs. And you'll see I wrote down the track width right here, 62 inches and 62.25. We're going to talk about this when we talk about wheel offset. First thing let's talk about is tire size. We want to set the stagger. Stagger is the difference on the front or the rear of the car between the left side and the right side as far as the tire size goes. So a car, for example, that has got 1 inch of stagger on the rear of the car, the left side tire will be 1 inch smaller around the tire than the right side is. Okay, here is a rule of thumb if you are have no idea what a car is going to do, what the track wants or anything. I've never seen a car that would not work unless you had less than 1 inch of stagger on the rear, okay? So 1 inch of stagger on the rear will always be a minimum point that the car will work as a minimum, all right? And I'm not saying that even me, sometimes I might be at 1/2 inch, I might be at 3/4 of an inch, but 1 inch will for sure work anywhere that from 0 to 1 would work. 1 will be fine. I've never seen a car that wanted more than 4 inches maximum. Now, I'm not going to say that there's not somebody out there that, 5 is a good number for them or 6 or something. But on a street stock, I've never seen a car that you needed to be below 1 or above 4 to even make the car work correctly and turn and it be because of stagger. Ideally, if you're new to a track and you're new to a car and you don't even know where to start at on the rear for stagger, I like 1 to 2 inches. 1 to 2 inches is going to work. Even if that track, really wants 3/4 of an inch is what it wants, or it really, it's ideal to be at a 1/2 inch. You're not going to be out to lunch between 1 and 2. The car is going to work. You can really get yourself in trouble if you need to have, 3 or more inches to make a car work, and you're down here below 1 inch. And so that's why I like 1 to 2 inches as a starting point for the rear on stagger. Again, that's the right rear being larger than the left rear by that much. On the front of the car, I'm not near as picky on stagger on the front of the car because the 2 front wheels are not tied together with an axle. You got to remember, you've got an axle going through there tying these 2 together. Like a cup rolling around in a circle, it's tied together. On the front, all it is doing is controlling wedge in the car across between the wheels, and the ride heights of the car itself. That's what stagger in the front of the car is doing. It has not got a direct relationship with the car coming around the turn in the same way as the rear. For that reason, on the front of the car, I like for a minimum to be 0 and a maximum 1 inch. And honestly, in your plan, as long as you're between those, I'm happy. The car is going to work fine. Now, yes, as this changes front and rear, it does affect the bite in the car and the wedge in the car. Because if I'm at 0 versus 1 inch, when I go to 1 inch, I absolutely am going to put bite in the car by doing that, because a little bit larger tire on one corner is going to push down a little bit more on the car on that corner. So that's like one leg on a chair getting a little bit taller. So it does matter from that standpoint. But if you stay within that 0 to 1 inch, especially just starting out, because you're not able to yet find out what the car really wants, so you have to have some starting point to go with. This is really good neutral way to start out on the car. So what does this actually mean for us? We've got these 5 tires here. So what are we going to do? Well, here's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to try to put between 1 and 2 inches on the rear. Now, I don't want to take, and if I've got these 5 tires right here, well, I've got an 83 right here, and I've got an 81.5 right there. So I could be like, well, I could have 1.5 inches of stagger. Well, but I'm setting myself up to my extremes. If I needed to replace this 83, do I have another 83? Well, not necessarily. I may find that everything else I've got is 82.5, 82.75, or 82 inches or something. Same deal on the 81.5. So when you're trying to figure out your stagger, don't set yourself up to the extremes if you can keep from doing that. I don't want to do that. I know that this 83 right here is on my bead lock and is my largest tire on the bead lock. And I know I'm going to put that on my right rear. I've already mounted it up, okay? So if I put, let's see, this is the right side because I'm looking back this way. So that's the right side, that's the left side. So if I put that 83-inch tire right here, and I came up and I said, okay, well, what if I put this 81.75 right here? Give myself a little wiggle room. Because, if I had to drop back to 82.5, like change out tires and stuff, I've got an 81.5 where I could just, in other words, I could shift from this 83 and 81.75 and I could shift up to 82.5 and 81.5, and like maintain 1 inch of that. You see how that works? I don't want to go to my extremes if I can keep from it as I mount up tires. All right, so if I'm over here with an 81.75, and then on the front of the car, I'm fine if I was to take and say, well, I could run this 81.5 right here and this 82 right here, and that's a 1/2 inch. I could do that. I could run the 82 and the 82 and a half. I could do those two right there on the front. Either one is going to be a 1/2 inch of stagger difference on the front of the car, whether I use these two or I used these two. The car doesn't care. I am raising and lowering the front end overall. You know, a 1/2 inch of rollout is an immeasurable amount in ride height overall when I do both of these together. All right, so it's not going to care. Now on the rear, it is true, a much larger tire and a much smaller tire, you're changing your ratio as far as your RPMs and the speed that the car carries, because you know you got your axles driving the rear wheels. On the front, they're just on bearings along for the ride. All right, so it really doesn't matter which way I go with it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with this 82 and this 82 and a half right here. So I'm going to reserve this 81 and a half. So if I had to, I could swap around, you know, several different ways I could swap around here. So I'm going to go and I'm going to put an 82 and a half right here, and I'm going to put an 82 right here. There's no right or wrong way. You're just trying, according to how many tires you've got, as you've got more tires and wheels mounted up, it gives you a lot more flexibility. But you can see that I'm just coming up with a plan so that I'm between 0 and 1 on the front, and I'm between 1 and 2 on the rear. That's what I'm doing. I'm trying to make sure, like if I was to cut a tire down and ruin it or something, you know, I could swap around and I could maintain this. I don't want my stagger to suddenly change dramatically on the front or the back, you know, mid-run or during the night, and then I'm not understanding why the car suddenly changed in handling, and it was because of that. So here we go. So we've got staggers now. We know which ones that we're going to put where, okay? Now, let's talk about air pressure and its effect, because we're not actually going to run at these rollout sizes. That's right. So these numbers represent at 12 pounds, okay? And so that's why you see me just at a 1/2 inch right here, and I'm just at 1 1/4 inches on the rear. Okay, so if I was to leave that right rear at 12 pounds, a Hoosier 3035 on dirt with a 3,000, 3,200 pound street stock, 12 pounds on that tire on the right rear on a bead lock will work fine. If I wasn't on a bead lock, I probably wouldn't go below 14. But that tire right there really does like 12 pounds. All right, so if I'm 12 pounds here, I'm probably on a feature end on these type of tires, I'm probably going to go down to about 9 pounds. I'm probably going to set that left rear up at 9 pounds. Now what's going to happen right here? Well, here's what's going to happen. That 81 3/4 is very likely going to end up being 81 and a half. I probably will get a 1/4 inch or close to it in that change right there, okay? So now I'm at 1 1/2 inches. So this is why I do them all the same and then figure out where they're going, because you pull your hair out trying to run them at a certain air pressure and then figure out where to go with it, all right? So now that ends up being 1 1/2 inches on the rear. Now on the front, this right front right here, I am going to air that up to about 15 pounds. Okay, now I'm not scared on a non-bead lock to run at 14. I feel like that in my experience on the Hoosier asphalt pull-off, it's a 10-inch wide asphalt carcass on a right front. It seems like 15 is a good number, but I'm happy anywhere between like 14 and 16. And as we're changing air pressures during the night, we're going to have to cover that in future videos. We will. We're going to cover that again. But as we're running during the night, you know, my range on the right front, I'm going to go ahead and write these on here just to be helpful. But on like asphalt pull-offs, 14 to 16, don't worry, I'm coming back around to those 8-inch wide tires. But like my range is 14 to 16 on that. My range on this one is like 11 to 13. All right. On that left rear, my range on it is like 8 to 10. See a theme, a pattern coming up here. And then on this left front right here, I typically run it about 1 pound more than the left rear. And so I'll target about 10 pounds. Now let me come back and let's talk about the changes. So we know the rollout changed to like 1 1/2 inches on the rear. Okay, we're estimating here, but it'll be pretty close. We went from 12 up to 15. We likely are going to increase that to 82 3/4. All right. So I'm estimating here probably 82 3/4. We drop that. That might drop down to like 81 7/8 possibly. It may stay around 82. Like I'm using the Stagger stick and it's only to 1/4 inch increments. So I might not be able to measure 81 3/4 just by dropping that 2 pounds. But let's just say if it did go that, 82 3/4, 81 7/8, it's almost an inch, So we'll just say, okay, it's almost an inch in the front, all right? And so your air pressure differences are affecting your stagger. They are changing, where they're at. So now we've got a plan, and again, on this right front, same deal, 9 to 11 pounds on that right front. So a vary tires around 2 pounds. That's, I found, like when you find what works and you find what gives you a good footprint, you kind of figure out what the range is. Every car, you need to have a notebook on it, and you start paying attention to this stuff, looking at wear on tires. But when you're starting out, you don't know, you don't have a notebook, so you just have to have some place to start. All right, so this is start. Now that I've made a hot mess out of this board, let's wipe this off. Let me think, did I miss anything? So we're 1.5 inches in the back on Stagger, we're 1 inch on the front. I want to talk about wheel offsets now. And I've talked about these range of tire sizes. Don't let me forget to come back and talk about other types of tires. All right, so I'm going to wipe all of this off, okay? All right, so notice I've got that 62 on that rear, and I've got that 62 1/4 on the front. That's because this is a 76 Firebird. Now, the rear end that I bought and built and put under this car is 62 inches. All right, so it's a floater 9-inch Ford. The way that I built this car, pay attention to this part, because if you've got an unknown car, you got to figure out what's going on here. The way that I built this car, I set this rear end up where this left side of the car is 0, okay? There's no difference in where that hub face is on the back to where that hub face is on the front. So that means that on this side, down through here, that rear hub is running inside of that front hub by 1/4 inch, okay? Now, I'll throw this in right here. According to the type of chassis, this is different. If you're on a 73 to 77, like our cool car is here that we built, and we're racing last year, and we'll be racing again this year, don't worry. But that car is very similar to the Camaro with the 62-inch track width, okay? If you're on a metric car, that's 58 inches and a little bit of change. And that's with stock lowers on a metric car. So if you've got the metric, those are control arms. They're really ugly, but those are control arms. But if you've got stock control arms on a metric right here, then your front width is a 58 and 3/8, I'm not sure. But it's 58 and a little bit of change. But if you've changed your lower control arms out to Novas, or like aftermarket tubulars that are positioned like Novas, it grows out to 60 inches when you do that. It adds an inch to each side of it when you do that. And so then you have to look at your rear end on a metric car, and you have to say, well, am I 58 inches and I've got a 58-inch rear, or am I 60 inches and do I have a 58-inch rear with the hub faces sitting in? And I hope that makes sense. Leave me some comments. Tell me how well we're doing on this part. But according to how wide your front track width is and how wide your rear end is, you need to figure out where these hub faces sit to each other. This is fixing to come together. Stay with me, y'all. So on this Camaro, I know that this is sitting inside of my front one by 1/4 inch. The reason that I know this is because I built the car. If I didn't and I had just bought the car, here's what I would do. I would string the car front to back. When I say string the car, I would take a jack stand and I would put it in front of the car, and I would put weights on the jack stand or something where I could pull a string really tight to it where it wouldn't move, okay? I would take and I would pull a string under the car all the way to the rear, okay? And I would not put it under the center of the rear end. I would actually take and like my mount points where my leaf springs bolt on or where my lower control arms bolt on. Remember, a car doesn't actually care what the shape of the frame is. It cares where those points are that your linkages and stuff hook to. That's all it sees when it's going around the track. It sees that, and it sees where weight is at. And the frame, you know, where the frame is does create where the weight's at. But all the car really cares about is all the linkage points. So I would take these two linkage points, whether it be springs or lower control arms, and I would take a tape measure and I would go across those two. I would find the exact center of them, and on the front of the car, you know, you've got underneath the middle of the car, you've got a dead center locator under the chassis. You can also take and measure from the front bolt on the left side to the front bolt on the right side, and that is a terrible marker. But you've got your bolts that go through your lower control arm right here. You can take and measure the exact center between them. You pull a string that goes front to back all the way through that is exactly on the middle on those two tape measure points. Now I've got the car strung for the center. Once I've done that, I can take and I can measure my front hub faces, all right? Whatever that is, it should be the exact same amount side to side. Now if it's not, that means that you're running like a different lower control arm on one side from the other, or you've got a bent car. I'm not going to say you don't, but you can be running, like if you're running a forward lower control arm on the right front or something like that going on, you know, that can change. Hopefully, we're talking about cars that we're starting out and everything, but they're going to be symmetrical. You figure out what that is. You're in the center of it. You come back here, you measure your rear end, and you see, are you in the center? And if you're not, how far different you are, where that moves, that's going to tell you whether your hub is sitting proud of your front hub or inside of it, okay? Either one. Same way on both sides. Now, if it's a 4-bar car like a Metric or a Chevelle or a big GM or something, it's typically going to be centered because your rods and everything that you hook up to in stock locations for your rear end is going to center your rear end. So even if you've got a narrow rear end, it'll be centered. But you need to understand that relationship. Now let's talk about the offset itself. I am going to run my right rear 1 inch inside of my right front, okay? I'm more interested in the right rear being inside of my right front by 1 inch than I am the exact offset amount. A car could work well with a 2-inch offset, a 3-inch offset, a 4-inch offset. All of those can work fine. They do make differences in how the car is going to rotate, how well it's going to hold weight over in the turn. They do matter, but according to the wheels you've got, if you're starting out, you're going to have wheels. You may not necessarily have a lot of choice here. So for example, if I had 2-inch and 3-inch wheels, I would put a 2-inch offset on the right front and a 3-inch offset on the right rear, you know, of the car to make sure that I'm shifted in, you know, by that 1 inch. Now, according to what you find on your hub faces, you may find that you're already 1 inch inside on the rear. So for example, if you have a Camaro and you measure your rear and it's 60 inches, and when you string it, you find it centered, you know that these two hubs are inside 1 inch on each side to start with, okay? So if you had the exact same wheel offset on the front and the back, you're 1 inch inside on the rear of the car. All right? On the left side, I like them to be both the same, okay? So, like in this case, you know, if I have a 4-inch offset on the front, I'm going to have a 4-inch offset on the rear. Honestly, I like a 3 is what I like. You know, I like a 3-inch offset. That's a good number right here. All right, same deal as like rules that can apply universally. If you have got 3 inches offset on all the way around the car except for the right front where you have a 2-inch offset, that car would be a good starting spot, you know, starting out where you're trying to figure out or you're trying to make it work. Or if you had to buy rims, if you bought all 3-inch offsets and then you had a spacer where that you could take and put and make it 2 inches on the right front, that would work well. Now on my car, let's come back around. Remember me being a 1/4 inch? All my wheels are the same backspace. All my wheels are 4-inch offset, all right? And that's, so like in my case, what I did was I put a 3/4 inch spacer on the hub itself. The car does not care whether you use a spacer between the hub and the wheel or the wheel itself, the back set offset in the wheel is different. It doesn't care. It doesn't know the difference. It sees this, it feels it the same way in how it puts that tire down on the track. So I add 3/4 of an inch here, and I've got another 1/4, you know, that's made up in the offset itself. That creates a 1-inch offset difference on the left side. Heads up. If you have got on your car a narrower rear end, then I would suggest running a spacer on the left rear. Now let me over dramatize this, or overdraw it a little bit. So if I've got the front here and the back is narrow, so like each side, you've got that, you know, you're 1 inch inside on each side. And let's say, you know, I'm sitting here and I'm in a Camaro and I'm 62 inches on the front and I'm 60 on the back. What I would do here is I would just bolt on the same wheel, so the same wheel offset on this right side, and then I would put a spacer in on this left rear and bolt on, and that would make them, and then I could run all the same wheels, and that, you know, that works if I did that. So you got to string the car, you got to figure out what you got, you know, and then you can do wheel offset. Again, the reason that I buy 4-inch offset wheels in a 10-inch wide wheel is because I run long studs, and so I run these really long studs that are like 4.5 inches long, and then if I want to, I can put up to 2 inches of spacer in there, and so that gives me from a 4-inch offset to a 2-inch offset anywhere on the car. So it gives me the most flexibility without having to move tires around on rims. Okay, what's next? Air pressure. Let's come back to that. Okay, we talked about the 30-35s, okay? Let's talk about H500s. I won't talk about what I know about. I don't want to mislead anybody. On the H500s, on the car here, so this is our car right here, left front, left rear, right rear. Okay, so on the H500s, here's what I found that works well. Anywhere from 13 to 15 on this left rear. On the left front, you know, 14 to 17. My range is a little wider on the H500s. On my right front, I'm good from about 17 up to about 22. That 17 on that right front, I can tell y'all from experience, once you get down around 17, that tire will start twisting under and not working well. Even if you don't pull it off the rim, the footprint of the tire itself, you'll have problems with it. On the right rear, I'm good from about 15 to about 17 on the right rear, works well. That's on H500s, that's my range. Like I think on my car right here, I believe that the last time I ran that car, I was somewhere around 16 and 14, and I was at 18, and I think I was at 16. I typically would end up with the right rear and the left front on the H500s being the same air pressure like that. But anyway, I think that's the last time I ran the H500. There's the ranges on H500s. They like a little more air pressure. It's a real hard sidewall on that tire, and it will cup in the center if you get the air pressure too low. and it will cup at a higher air pressure on the right side than the left side. The left side can tolerate a little bit less air pressure without getting cupped under from pressure from the from the side forces. Like on that right front, you got to have more air pressure in it, or absolutely. Now, what am I talking about when I say cup? Now, let me cover that right quick. We're going to try to do some videos here where we cover everything. So if I have got the footprint of a tire, all right, so imagine here's the ground. Here's the ground. What we want is we want to maximize the amount of the bottom of the tire that stays touching the track. And so, like on that H500, if the air pressure is, like for example, if the air pressure was too high, what will happen is it'll crown. And so I'll lose some contact on the edges here, and I'll have all this contact in the middle. And if you look at wear on the tire, you'll see that it wears more in the middle in that situation, okay? That's if it's too high. It would have to be really too high, like 26, 27 pounds of air before it would really start doing that significantly. But low is where you'll really run into it. It's more common. Somewhere like on a right front around 17 pounds or less, it will start, it may, when you're going straight down the track, it may be flat and fine, but when you really start putting side load on it, entering the turn, when you really need that tire to be working, it gets so much pressure right here on this edge. This middle, there's not enough air pressure holding the center of the tire down on the track. And so the middle's trying to give, and it buckles upwards and back down, and it does that. And we call that cupping. It cups up in the middle. And it's where that this edge is twisting in on the tire. Now, important point. More camber can help you get away with running a little less air pressure because I lean the whole car. But it will still come up, it will still affect it. The tire can still twist and cup even when you've got a lot of camber in the tire trying to compensate for it. But it does give you some room. Definitely not a beginner thing, but it is a factor, okay? So that's the cupping. It'll really happen on the right front. Doesn't happen as much on the right rear, but that's the effect. I see that as one of the big drawbacks of the H500 as far as you have to stay on top of your air pressures. They don't like to run as low air pressures. I see guys running really low air pressures in the H500s and the tires don't wear right. The tires will be like real hot on the edges, cool in the center, and just not work well and not getting the lap times they're after, okay? Now let's talk about the KK704, the G60, all right? So the G60 is kind of in between. I ran G60s for several years. I really like them. I like the American Racer G60 better than the Hoosier. It seemed like it had a little bit softer sidewall on it. It was definitely easier to mount that tire. But anyway, on those tires right there, you can get away on a G60 with getting down around 12 pounds on the right rear. So, like 12 to 15 on the right rear. You can get down about 10, about 10 to 12 on the left rear. On the left front, I wouldn't be scared on the left front to go down to 9 on that tire. I'm a little scared to go down. Seemed like I have twisted a G60 off on the rear, spun one off at 9 pounds before. Now that just may have been me and I didn't have it mounted well. It seemed like I have had a problem. 9 or 10 pounds on the left front. Right front, again, I'm going to say more like 14 to 16 is my minimum on the right front on G60s. So they'll stand up. The footprint on that, like when you look at the H500, an H500 is kind of like a little bit rounder. And then the G60 is kind of more square. And it seems like that it's got more of a dirt carcass that's designed for this sidewall to just, this whole footprint moves over. When I watch videos of how the right rears act between a H500 and a G60, it seems like when I'm watching the right rear of a car that's got fairly low air pressure in it get twisted over, it looks like that this is kind of getting rolled like this is kind of cupping under like that, and it looks like on the G60 it's more like it's doing this. it looks like that this footprint, in other words, you'll see that the sidewall is twisted in on the rim. It's twisted in on the rim, but you still see the whole sidewall is there. It's just that the tire is given. It's like it's got a softer sidewall and it's given. Whereas on the H500, you'll see that the track is actually up on the sidewall of the tire. And so you know that that tire underneath had to have given and cupped. And so I do think that the G60 can tolerate a little bit lower air pressure, give you a little bit more spring in your tire to be able to stay hooked into a track that's really slick. So don't worry about remembering this. I'll put it on Dirt Race Life in the blog. We've got a blog there now on the new website. We'll put it in tables and everything to go to, and then we'll just start building on this right here. So I'm looking for feedback. Really appreciate it. See you next time.